understand.
like when a bigger
Test.
meeting than normal can happen on just a whatever day.
Test.
Oh, Murphy's Law.
Testing. Let's see. Let's take a look. Let's take a look.
I don't know the first thing about any of that kind of stuff. I wouldn't even begin to get in the middle of that.
Recording in progress.
Test. Good. They take this little break. David.
You want me to say something?
Yeah, it looks like it's.
Yeah, you're
because of the increase in prices, price guarantees. I would say that's been the most challenging.
Okay, wonderful.
Recently.
So that's all. I just really wanted to ask that one big question because I know that's what I wanted to ask. Other than that, make sure you got your questions ready, and we're just going to let Brooks and Thomas take it from here. He's got his mic on, and here you go, my friend.
It's
Y'all
rolling.
got it.
Good morning. Thank you for having us, Cragen and Courtney. We love doing these. We do probably 1 or 2 a month. Most of the time it's Patrick Cicchini, who I'm sure you guys have met at one point or another up here talking because he loves to talk. One of those guys that can sell ice to an Eskimo.
He's good at it.
Yeah. It's about 70-30 with the BS scale and the actual truth reality that comes out of his mouth. He is our CEO and one of our partners. My name is Brooks, and as Cragen said, this is Tom Ray. We're with Sin & Green and Associates. I've been doing it for the better part of 17, 18 years. However, I've been working for the company. I've had a driver's license as my father was one of the founders of the company. Tom's been appraising for
38 years.
38 years. Okay, so a long time, and which is one of the best perks of working at Sin & Green is you can walk up and down the halls, and there's literally over 350, 400 years of experience within our halls. So if you don't know the answer, there's a good chance that someone in the building does. We have, I think, 12 or 13 offices now in different states. We have a commercial division as well that's run by 2 of our smarter, more intelligent guys in the business. We're in Maryland, West Virginia, North Carolina, and now San Antonio, Texas. So if you guys venture out and about or have any contacts looking for business in those states and areas, please reach out. I think that's just about it about us. Think of anything else that would be
Nothing
interesting?
of real importance.
Yeah, okay. So what is a real estate appraisal, or what is an appraisal? An appraisal, to keep it simplistic, is an opinion of value. So it's an opinion. My opinion is going to differ from Tom's. It's going to differ from the other 16 guys in our office. Real estate appraisal, or an appraisal of real estate, is the most probable price a property would sell for in a competitive market with a willing buyer and seller, both motivated, acting in their best interest. There are 3 approaches to value. So when we're doing our appraisal, we calculate the 3 approaches. One is the income approach, which is what a property can produce as far as the income is concerned. That's typically geared more towards investment properties or investors. You take the net operating income and divide that by the capitalization rate, or you can take the gross rent multiplier. Basically, you find a rental property or investment property that sells, and divide the sales price by the market rent or the rent for that property, and you have a gross rent multiplier. So then you can take your property and derive a value in that sense. The second approach to value would be the cost approach, which is more geared towards a new construction or specialized, more complex situations in appraisal assignments. And we essentially take the cost of the property or what it would cost to build the subject property new and subtract the depreciation from said property to derive a value. And the third and most commonly used or most typically used in our line of work is the sales comparison approach. I believe you guys refer to it as a CMA. So we take comparable properties in the market area that sell in a similar market area or a similar neighborhood as the subject property, adjust for physical characteristics and other characteristics of the property to reconcile a final opinion of market value. When we're out at the property doing the inspection, we a typical inspection will include taking pictures of the exterior, taking pictures of the interior. Obviously, we're going to measure each property from the outside in. We're going to note any and all improvements, significant updates, upgrades, any deferred maintenance, wear and tear on the property. And it's typically going to be about a 25 to 30-minute process, depending on the size and stature of the home. Upon inspecting the property, we'll come back to the office and go through our process of developing the appraisal report. I don't really have much, so I'm going to turn it over to him to get into the VA side of things, because I know this is mainly about the VA appraisal process. And then we'll jump right into the Q&A, which is essentially the nuts and bolts or the meat and potatoes of these sales meetings. And it's mutually beneficial because we like to hear from you just as much as you like to hear from us. What you're thinking, what you're wondering or inquiring about. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Tom.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
Yep.
One of the biggest questions I hear is what's the difference between a conventional report, FHA report, and a VA report? A lot of agents, there's some kind of stigma that the VA comes up with a different value or they're lower than the conventional, but I approach it all the same. It's all the same process. I would be pulling the same comps, going through all the same data. So there's really no difference there. There are some differences when it comes to the Veterans Administration. If we're doing an appraisal and we're coming in below the contract sales price. If it was FHA or VA, I would contact the lender. Say, is it okay to contact the agents? I'm having some difficulty. The lender always says, absolutely. Now, when I contact the agents, I can't discuss value with you, but I'm going to say, look, I'm having some problem. Do you have some sales you want me to consider? You know, send them over. With the VA, we have to contact just the point of contact on the order, which is the lender, from the 1805 form, which is the VA order form. We're not allowed to call the agents. We just contact that lender, and then the lender at the point of contact contacts the agents and says, send the sales you would like to the lender, then they send them to us. They're supposed to be on a grid, on a sales grid, but in all my years, I've never had an agent send them on the sales grid. They just send the addresses. So, and that's fine. And then in the actual VA appraisal, I will put the addresses they sent and explain why I didn't use them, or 9 times out of 10, they're already in the report. That's probably the major difference between the two. But other than that, there shouldn't be any difference with value. As far as FHA versus VA, it's all the same minimum property standards. They're all very similar. That's all anything I have to say other than to handle some questions.
So just wanted to touch on, the rebuttal process. When we perform an appraisal assignment, we are obligated to our client. And more times than not, we're going to do an appraisal for a lender or a financial institution of some sort. So they are the client. We're the eyes and ears of said bank or mortgage lending company. So when we go out to do an appraisal, it's for the mortgage lending institution. Oftentimes we'll get calls from the listing agent asking, why didn't you give me a call? Well, you know, what was wrong? I thought you were gonna give me a call give me a heads up if there was a problem with the value. Well, we're not there for the listing agent. You know, the first time you pick up the phone and call the listing agent and try to start negotiating terms and this, that, and the other, you know, you'll get a call from the lender or the selling agent saying, you're doing that appraisal for my buyer. You're doing that appraisal for American Financial Network. You're not doing that appraisal for the listing agent. So just to clear that up, when we do the appraisal, it's for our client or who contacts us orders the appraisal.
Wonderful. So we're going to open it up for some Q&A. I know that's why we're all here, really, because I'm sure we all have some burning questions. So I'm my man, Jimmy, he had his hand up first, but I'm going to walk around just so everybody on Zoom can hear. We don't have to repeat and do all the things. So I'm going to hand you the mic. Just hold your hand up and I'll come to you.
Right.
Radio voice.
Thanks for coming, guys. I'm wondering how you feel about agents providing the updated information like new fridge, new appliances, new roof, the roof is 3 years old or whatever. Is that helpful to you? And do you prefer
Yes.
us doing that?
And I'll ask for it. And the date that it was done. That's a good question. A lot of times when I set up the inspection, I'll say, okay, can you tell me about the renovations? A lot of time it's in the listing. So, you know, we don't have to ask, but if it's not, if you want to put together a list, say the new floors in 2023, the baths were done, and that's all very helpful to us.
so it's okay if we hand you that list of here's the
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Please ask every inspection appointment.
Yeah.
Well, that way you got.
Similar to speech.
Okay.
Every inspection appointment, I'll do my inspection and complete that entire process. And at the end, I'll ask either the seller of the property, the homeowner, or the agent, are there any significant updates or improvements within the last 5 to 10 years? The fridge is personal property, so that's another big item, whether you know it's real property or personal property or chattel. So other examples of personal property would be like a hot tub.
But wouldn't that add to the total value of the property though, if the appliances are all new?
So the appliances that are personally affixed. So if the fridge is freestanding,
Yeah.
we can't consider it, just like an
Yeah.
above ground pool.
And usually I'll run through that with the agent or the homeowner. Can you tell me about anything? Windows, HVAC, roof, kitchens, baths, and then, you know, floor coverings, that kind of thing. And that's very helpful. That's a good question.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna switch. Well, I'll take that. That's actually a good idea. I'll take that one.
All right.
Y'all pass back and
Work
forth.
smarter, not
Sounds
harder.
good.
You know,
We'll
everything.
get
you
it
do is
figured
a work
out
in
by the end of the
progress, but we
program.
already know. Questions? I know we have some over here.
So to go along with Jimmy Ray's question, how do you feel about agents giving you comps at the inspection, not just the list of repairs?
I like it because I want to see where they were thinking, how they listed the property. And a lot of times agents farm a neighborhood, so they've been in all the comparables, you know, they took the tour or whatever, or they're friends with the agent who sold it or whatever. They're a great form of information. Some appraisers don't like that. I don't know, but I've had agents tell me, I tried to hand the appraiser some comps and he looked at me like I was crazy and didn't do anything. So, you know, each appraiser is different, but I personally like it.
Yeah, I will never deny comps from an agent. You know, and when it comes down to it, if there is a problem and we reach out to the lender and say, you know, we're having an issue supporting the sales price, can we contact the agent? That's the first thing we do is we want to call and get inside your brain and see how you priced the property out. So like Tom said, it's a good source of information for us. And, you know, we might have missed one, or maybe there was an off-market sale that wasn't on the MLS. Or maybe one of those sales had some kind of duress or distress that we were thinking about using that we probably shouldn't have used or didn't do our homework on. So
A lot of times we'll get that house sold, but it needed $20,000 worth of work underneath that, you know, obviously ain't going to be advertised in the listing because we're reading the listing. That's an advertisement for the program for the house, and the photos are going to look great, and you don't always get the exact picture. But yeah,
And the other question is, I've heard from different appraisers, different things. Do you guys personally call out repairs on conventional loans I know that they can be called out on FHA and VA, but it's controversial if they can or should be called out on conventional.
Well, typically on a conventional loan, especially if it's a sale, if there's some deferred maintenance, then we're supposed to note it. Now, we might not do the appraisal subject to, meaning it doesn't have to be repaired, but we can make an adjustment for it. Whereas if it's FHA or VA, it would have to be subject to that repair and it'd have to be repaired prior to closing.
It's a great question. Does the appraiser get a copy of the purchase contract?
We do,
Yes.
but a lot of times we do not get a copy of the completed PICRA.
Yeah,
And
which
then
I would
that's-
assume you wouldn't want to get that, right? Right. I know we don't. We don't want that. That's
Yeah,
why
if-
anybody that's
you know,
listening.
I mean,
the
if
lender
the,
doesn't-
and the problem is if if the agent shows up with the PICRA and there's all this, they've got some termite damage under the house and it's going to be taken care of. But if we know about it, then we have to do the appraisal subject to that being taken care of.
Yes, sir, 100%. Sometimes there are upgrades agreed to in the contract.
Yeah, well, I'll answer that as a broker. So yes, there are sometimes upgrades that are agreed to in the contract, but that's between the two agents and the buyer and the seller. The appraiser doesn't really get involved to negotiation back and forth between the two. They're there for the house to see that it's needed, and that has to go with the brokers and the agents.
We got one more coming over here.
Real quick, just to follow up on, on your question. Typically in a conventional deal, if it's a safety issue, we have to note it. And all lenders are different. You know, some lenders want you to note everything in a conventional appraisal and make a cost to cure and make it subject to. Whereas most lenders would just say, make that cost to cure adjustment for said repair or required repair, and then proceed as though, you know, you're doing the property as is, so.
Yeah, and that's a safe, sanitary, secure, then it has to be repaired. But some lenders, like Brooks was saying, they have different limitations. The cost of cure might be $2,500, or they say that it has to be repaired. So it's case to case. But
Is it by the companies that you guys?
it's usually the lender. Yeah.
How are the limitations determined? That's what they were asking.
But we're the eyes and ears of the lender. So if there's a deficiency, we have to report it. Now, whether they're going to require that it be repaired or not is kind of up to them.
So that brings up a great point too. Some may or may not have heard of what's called an escrow holdback. So we can actually do an escrow holdback for certain items, up to $5,000. And it is going to be at the discretion of the underwriter if they allow for it or not. Usually it's only something cosmetic. They will not allow for anything structural. Good point blank. It's not even don't even ask. But if it's like, I don't know, a minor, like the one that we had was a smoke detector. It was an FHA loan, HUD owned home. HUD, as you may or may not know, they don't do a whole lot of repairs. And we couldn't close the loan without a $35 smoke detector. So we did an escrow holdback for this smoke detector on this FHA HUD loan and was able to close the loan, you know? And as a closing gift, we gave him a smoke detector. And I said, all right, now take this, keep it on the wall and take a picture of it, send it to us so we can get this thing funded. So there are options out there, like you were talking about with deficiencies, how we can kind of have little workarounds.
Okay, if a listing is on a street that is right in the center of a homeowner association. However, this street and all the newer builds on it are not part of that HOA. Would you use the comps in that HOA when the purchaser is using VA finance, or can we find comps outside of the surrounding neighborhood to also use?
Explain the question again. You say you've got one street and a
Okay.
HUD that's
Well,
not part of
it's my
the,
listing.
part of the
And
HOA?
I thought it was part of the Campus East Association HOA because the street is in the dead center of the subdivision.
Okay.
But all the homes on this cul-de-sac were built in 2005. Everything else in Campus East was built 1983, 84, 85. So there are no HOA dues. There is no HOA period.
Mhm.
Would the VA appraiser use strictly comps from Campus East, or would he or she want comps maybe there and also outside, like up to a mile away?
I would look for both and to see if there is
Okay.
any, if the market is, if there's a difference.
Okay,
But obviously the one that you have, the age of that property is a lot less than Campus East. So I'm gonna
Right.
try and find other stuff that's similar in age, similar, yours probably a little bigger than if it's
Not
newer.
necessarily bigger, but
but-
it's way newer and.
Yeah,
it's
so
gonna-
you try and
it has a
find,
garage,
try to
but it
find
doesn't
like
have-
properties. And there might be one in Campus East that's been updated that would be similar to yours.
How,
And
how far back will a VA go?
we can go back to a year.
You can do a year.
Yes.
Okay.
We
I
can go
mean,
beyond a year, we just can't really give the ones that are beyond a year consideration in the final reconciliation.
yeah, they would be
That helps.
comps
Thank
4
you.
and 5, but yeah.
And to further answer your question, it's more about who's your typical buyer? If you're gonna show that property, what other properties are you gonna show? Everyone wants to make us think about like half a mile radius or a mile radius. How many times have you shown a property and drove out a mile and then made a left-hand turn and just kind of stayed within that area? So, it's more typical of who is your buyer and what other properties would you market if you were marketing the subject property?
Does the HOA come into play as far as value is concerned?
Yes and no, yeah, it depends, really. I mean,
9 times out of 10, you're using comps from the same HOA,
Yeah.
from the same neighborhood. That is kind of a unique situation that he has there. And there might be that the market's not recognizing any difference, but it just depends neighborhood to neighborhood, property to property.
and I have a few
But-
rental properties in that HOA at Campus East, so consider yourself lucky that you're not a part of that.
Can we talk storage sheds? I've heard some people say if you write it into the contract that it conveys at no value, that it shouldn't be considered on the appraisal. But then I've heard that it depends on how it's fixed to the property, whether it's on a foundation or if it's movable.
You answered your own question.
Very
Yeah. If they're on a permanent foundation, then we include them. But if they're not, then I consider them personal property.
Yeah, it's the same thing we were talking about, the refrigerator and the above ground pool, it has to be permanently affixed to the property, even if it's in the contract. I mean, they could put the above ground pool in the contract too if they want. It's considered a personal property or chattel if it's not permanently affixed to the property.
So can you get more into detail about permanently affixed? For example, I have a neighbor who wants to sell and there's a concrete foundation
Mhm.
where the shed used to be. The previous owner took the shed down. They put the shed back up, but it's literally just sitting.
Sitting.
It's not.
Yeah, if it's on runners or blocks and it's not permanently affixed to that concrete foundation or the turn down slab, then it would still be personal property
Okay.
or chattel.
Yeah, usually if there's a foundation, we're going to include it.
Yeah.
I would say, yeah.
Do you guys consider a closing costs, like do you all take in consideration with the price?
For the closing costs for the subject,
Yeah,
we do not.
Are you talking
We-
about assistance?
the closing cost assistance.
Yeah, we do not. We're looking at the closing costs on the comparables. And if, say you've got 3 sales, 2 of them sold for 300,000, one of them sold for 320, and they're all the same. Well, the one that sold for 320, they paid 20,000 in closing costs. If it's an unusual amount, say over 5%, then we would adjust for that. Or maybe not use that comparable, find other sales that have
That's-
similar closing costs.
That's a good question, because a lot of times, we'll get the call after the fact if we cut a deal. And they'll say, well, we gave, $20,000 in closing costs. Why can't you take that into consideration? Well, it has nothing to do with value. It's more or less how you're selling the property and how you're enticing that buyer to buy the property. It really has no, rhyme or reason as far as how we ascertain the market value of the property. And like Tom said, we'll consider the closing costs of the comparable properties used to determine the market
And
value.
Usually we'll see that it was listed at 300 and then they wrote
Yeah.
at 320. Well, they needed closing costs. They
Yeah.
kind of work that way.
Yeah, that's great. As
But will
we
you
all,
give it
sure,
that
show of
back?
hands, in the last 90 days, how many, you've sold a house, either side that you got closing cost assistance from the seller? Pretty much the whole room. So I know that on the majority of the deals that I worked in the last 90 days, we're getting closing cost assistance anywhere from 1.5% to 3%.
It's just a weird market.
Ingrid asked a while that and Ms. Levine, I'll get you after the other two. I'm trying to go in order. Ingrid said, So if there is a negotiation and the seller is paying for an upgrade in the negotiation, is the upgrade that the seller is paying for accounted for appraisal purposes? It's not done yet. It's just been given.
So if the upgrade is, if the upgrade is going to be completed prior to closing and it's a purchase transaction, then we will consider it and probably do the appraisal subject to a final inspection or subject to said upgrade or update, revision or, repair, renovation.
Is she talking new construction or is she talking they're gonna add?
I just said,
Yeah, so yeah, I was getting ready to say, if they're putting on like a new roof prior to closing, we'll have to go, we'll do the appraisal under the hypothetical condition that the roof is already done
But we
and-
have to go back
and then make the report subject to a final inspection.
then Ms. Levine said, will you give it the value if they are going over to get closing costs, which I think you kind of addressed?
Like, we're gonna offer, instead of 250, 255, now it's 5K back from closing costs to make the deal work.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, we're using the comparables to come up with the value. So what's going on with the subject doesn't have any impact.
There are two questions. One's kind of just a general question, but what are your guys' opinion on the difference between like the square footage in bedrooms and bathrooms? Like, you've got a 2,000 square foot house, one's a 3-bedroom, one's a 4-bedroom. Are those comparable or not?
I think that kind of depends on the neighborhood. And if I've got a 3-bedroom, I'm going to try and use homes that are 3-bedroom. But if there's one that's a 4-bedroom that's similar in size and it's adjusting similar to the 3-bedrooms, looks like the market's not really noticing a difference there. So I would use it. But
Interesting.
yeah, would I come in with all 4 bedrooms when I'm appraising a 3-bedroom? Probably the underwriter's going to call you out on that and say you need to demonstrate the marketability of 3-bedroom.
Okay,
So
I see.
It all goes back to, who's your buyer, what market you're in. If you're down at the ocean front and, you have a 4-bedroom and a 3-bedroom, same size, that 4-bedroom is probably going to get a higher value. Because, if you're going to rent that property, it's going to rent for a lot more as a 4-bedroom than a 3-bedroom. But, if you're in a, Aragona Village or a Red Mill or Ocean Lakes and there's no difference between, or no market reaction between a 4-bedroom and a 3-bedroom, then no, we're probably not going to adjust for it.
Okay.
In some of those tract-built neighborhoods, you had the option to make it 3 larger bedrooms or
Right.
4 bedrooms, and it's all throughout. So you might be able to tell a difference there.
Okay.
Where we really get some differences when you're talking about a 2-bedroom house
Yeah.
to a 3-bedroom. Pretty much if you're looking at a 2-bedroom, we want to be using all 2 bedrooms as comps. And obviously with a 1-bedroom, usually we see those in a condominium.
All right. And the follow-up question to that, let's say, all right, so kind of the whole thing with like, what is a bedroom? Let's say you have a downstairs office that has all the qualifications of a bedroom. It's got like, but it's got like the French doors on it, but there's no vent in that room. Would you consider it a bedroom or is that not because of no vent? Even though it's attached to like the house, like it's not like a.
What do you mean vent, like for the air conditioning
Yeah, like an
vent
air
or a
conditioning
heating vent?
right.
If it's not heated, we're not supposed to include it in the living area.
It was the optional in that neighborhood. I can tell you right now that it was the model that was built with the optional room and they went with the French doors.
But it's got to have
They forgot
there's
it.
no vent in
Like a
there.
sunroom or just like the
No, it was it was the front corner of the house and it was the optional bedroom. They put the French door like the office and then forgot to put the vent in.
Oh.
Yeah, it's like they took the family room.
Yeah,
and
that's
then put,
weird.
Like a wall.
So
out there.
the vent really isn't on that list of criteria to establish whether or not a room is a bedroom or not. It's typically, ingress, egress, window,
Mhm.
and it used to be a closet, but they've been a little bit more lenient on closets lately. So to answer your question, I would say a vent is not going to, detract me from calling something a bedroom.
That's
Yeah.
cool. Yeah.
No, as far as a bedroom, but it should be
Yeah, it's kind of.
heated to be included in the living
Well,
area.
That's the
Yeah.
weird part, because it's like 2 French doors. It's not like an exterior door or anything, and
Right.
it's part of, like, it was part of the family room. Like in some of the other models, like she said, but they literally put up like a wall and turned it into an office.
Right.
So, but. it's big
And I mean,
enough
is the
to
vent right there at the floor blowing?
Glad.
It'd probably be fine, but
Yeah.
You know, you'd have to see it.
Curious
Yeah.
what appraiser. Because I mean, I listed it as a 4-bedroom, but because, there's egress, there's not ceiling heights there.
MLS rules and appraisal are two different things. You can list something, it doesn't mean.
Well, that's why I'm asking.
Does
now.
it have access to a full bathroom?
What's that?
Does it have access to a full bathroom, or do you have to go like through the living
No, you
room?
have to
kitchen?
leave and go back.
So then there's a little bit of functional obsolescence. Typically a bedroom has to have access to a full bathroom, without having to, walk through the entire house to get to said bathroom.
And if you had to list it, you could always say 3 primary bedrooms with the
Yeah.
flex space, could be possible 4th bedroom, office, you know.
Do you
guys
have certain values for bedrooms and baths that are additional or that you subtract for not having a bedroom?
Well, no, I
Wait,
mean.
We couldn't hear the question because Jimmy Ray went out of turn. It doesn't have, can you pass him the mic to ask the
Here's
question so
Jimmy
they
Ray.
can hear on Zoom?
Yeah, I was just asking if there was an assigned value for bathrooms, full baths, half baths, extra bedrooms, if there's a standard value to those.
So yes and no. The answer to your question, short answer is no, there's not an assigned value. It's all dictated by the market. So if we hold up 3 properties that are all similar in most physical characteristics, all the same size, all the same site size, all in the same neighborhood, all the same design style, all the same quality condition. This one sold for 305, this one sold for 300. This has 2 bathrooms, this has 1.5. Then we know that half bathroom is worth $5,000.
And it varies neighborhood to neighborhood.
Right.
And from time frame to time frame, so you're always in there. Just find some comps that have similar bathroom count.
Yep,
you know,
it's called the
bedroom count.
paired sales
Ideal,
analysis.
yeah.
It's how we are
That's
supposed to
what it's called.
extract our adjustments.
So, I mean, if you add a bedroom, sorry, I'm not. If you add a bedroom to your home, how much value does that add to the value of your home? Or does that depend on the comps as well?
Depends on the comps as well. So like we were just discussing, it all depends on what market you're in. Like I said, if you're at the oceanfront or if you're in a highly competitive rental market, then that bedroom is going to add probably more value than, a typical market that's tract built homes.
And we get that question too. How much does a pool add? Well,
Yeah.
it depends. There's no one number that you can give. It's all extracted from the market.
You guys were talking about cost to cure earlier
Mhm.
and wanted to see how that number is determined if you guys are appraisers and not contractors.
That's a good
Google.
question. We have a value wheel. We just spin it and then, yeah.
We have contractors that we contact, builders. We also Google Home Depot, Lowe's, what it would cost to replace that typical deferred maintenance.
Yeah, and these are not large items. There just might be some damaged soffit or some rotted wood around the garage door or nothing major, but something that the lender wants addressed, and it would have an impact on the appraisal, but not a huge impact. And always put in my report, I'm not a licensed contractor, so this estimate may be higher or lower, but yeah.
Once we talked about it too, and a little bit about, the lenders, underwriter and all the things like this. So it's called, we call it a collateral underwriter, collateral meaning they're gonna make sure that they agree with what Tom and what Brooks put on paper. Because, so whenever we say, hey, the client may get an email and says, hey, your appraisal's in. And then you're calling me like, hey, what's up? The appraisal's in. Well, unfortunately, the appraisal hasn't been reviewed by the collateral underwriter yet, which is usually about 24 hours. They say 48, but that's just if we get some crazy ass busy. So, just kind of give it grace, because especially with the VA, we want to follow the guidelines and make sure we're doing everything right and doing right by the guideline and the code and the law. But at the same time, when it comes to the collateral underwriter, they go and they may take a picture of, I don't know, a hole in the wall, and they don't call it out subject to, but our underwriter will go through and say, no, dude, this is actually not within the guidelines of FHA. You got to get that hole fixed. So this, kind of keep that in mind, there's layers. They go and do the inspection, they give the report, the value is this, and then, it's as is, but then we might go back behind them and say, well, it's not really as is. And in very, very rare occasions, the underwriter could come back and said, I don't agree with 350. I think it's 349, you know, in very rare occasions. It doesn't happen often at all for sure, but because yeah, could question all the comps. So just keep those in mind. We try and have grace with your lenders that you're working with. And even on the listing side, try and have grace for the buyers agents, you know, the lenders and all that, because we're all working together for one goal for sure.
And lots of grace for the appraisers.
Yeah.
Comment to add to that, I'm Melissa with Talent.
No, you good. You wrong.
We get approached from time to time with regard to VA loans specifically. If there's small damage, let's say we found termite damage on a baseboard in a home and that gets called out, it's on the PICRA, it needs to be fixed because it's a VA loan. We have had them ask us to actually supply a letter, even though baseboard's aesthetic, that particular thing is aesthetic and does not compromise the structural integrity of the home. Is there, when you all are doing an appraisal and or you're seeing a home inspection that has those things, is that something that you point out to agents to possibly let us know that like ahead of time? So the day of closing, they're like, oh no, we don't have this letter and we really need to have that in order to close this loan. Is that something you call out for them to maybe get ahead of the game on?
Well, that would really be up to the lender if they're requiring it to let somebody know that they're going to be requiring that. Now, when we go do an inspection, if it's an FHA or VA appraisal, and, you know, I see some baseboard that obviously termite damage, I'm going to note it and call for termite inspection just to make sure that there's not issues elsewhere. But that's going to be way ahead, you know, that'll be on the appraisal. So that certainly shouldn't be something that's going to be addressed the day of closing.
Yeah, and also, you know, you said, are we going to address it with the agent? Yes, if we see something that is clear and obvious or apparent, we'll certainly come out and tell you. We don't want surprises just as much as you guys don't want surprises at the closing table. So, like Craig said, we're all in this together, and we want this, you know, ship to keep going. And you know, if there's something that we see that we think may be addressed or needs to be addressed, we'll let you know for sure.
I'm Pam Tyndall with Garrett Realty Partners. I normally work Peninsula side, so it's good to be down here. My first question relates to what you said. You talked about the process of the appraisal and letting the client knows it's about client education. As I prep kind of education materials to send and it's templated, is there a flow chart or something you have that shows like an appraisal might be done, but it has to go through the collateral under that I could, do you have that, or is something I can create it?
90 steps, so like.
So there's no simplified version of it? Okay.
Basically, if your client gets an email.
That's another underwriting, being underwritten,
So-
a mistake. Something comes in, an underwriter's looking at it.
So in the grand scheme, how it works is there's the reason why it's sent to the client immediately is because there's rules in place that if we do not send it to the client with a certain amount of time frame, I believe it's 72 hours. If we do not send it to them with that time frame, then there's like some big deal. There's stuff that
Truth in lending is off.
it's violated rules.
So
Okay.
this goes out
So that's why
when it's ready.
AFN specifically has put it in place to send it out immediately. Don't worry, I fought back on it. We fought back on it because we're like, hey, can we just wait so we don't have to get 19 phone calls from the buyer's agent listing it? Like, look, the buyer said they got the thing in and blah, blah, blah. And obviously the buyer doesn't know unless they're a seasoned investor. They don't know how to read the appraisal report really. But so that being said, once they receive it, within probably 24 hours, it's going to get the notice of value from the VA collateral underwriter or the SAR, or it's going to get the collateral underwriter is going to review it and then sign off on what they said.
Okay. But the rule of thumb is any document you give us is reviewed by an underwriter of some sort. We just don't get it and you say, oh, we turned it in. Doesn't mean it's right.
Yeah.
Just because we got it doesn't mean it's right on any document, appraisal or not.
I wish there was a simplified process, right?
Or just for me as the agent, being able to at least describe it and maybe give a simplified version of it in whatever template I use to say, here's what an appraisal is versus a comparative market analysis that I do. So that way they have the information. even, and then the loan officer clearly clarifies the extra details that are in that.
For sure. I mean, that's something, if you want, we can talk offline, and we can definitely
Well,
walk through it and kind
yeah.
of set up a game plan for you.
Yeah.
For sure.
The other thing is I have an dated 2018 appraisal cost adjustments thing. So somebody asks you on a bedroom, do you have any kind of product that's like an estimate? So I have it, I got it from my broker and it says, here's kind of guesstimates on if you add a bedroom or whatever. So I have some type of resource to give ballpark to a client who says, hey, I'm gonna.
We have one if you need one.
Yeah, I'm just curious. Mine's dated and I have a name. I don't know who she is. Chuck is my Chuck, forgot Chuck's last name. Anyway,
Chuck's a good guy.
yeah, so Chuck gave it to me and I just use it as a reference. So if you share
Like
just.
what the value is of doing the bathroom, right? Or.
Right,
I'm gonna put
and
in the kitchen in.
you know, with the disclaimer that this is just an estimate, just like a lot of things we do. This isn't, you know, the final say. It's just, hey, if you wanna.
Breakdown of an average.
Right.
You guys go up or down. Do you guys have one of those?
No, to the spec, like what Jimmy Ray said, it all depends on the market. So there's not one answer you can give for that. You know, how much is a pool worth? It's,
This
you
is
know,
being recorded.
yeah.
Asked because I have one. It's dated 2018. That's a few years back. So I just for education, client education, or even for me, I don't share this with clients. I just want to have an idea. So as I get better, I can kind of say, hey, you could guess $500 to $800 or whatever. Give them that range. So if you don't, I'll get you. Last question. I'm currently in a HUD transaction, FHA 203B with the repair escrow. So the initial appraisal came back lower than expected. It's in Dendron in Surrey County. I asked the loan officer, I said, yes, it needs repairs in the home, the stolen condenser unit, the HVAC isn't working, appraiser went in and it's kind of a lower than expected. I said, so once that it's a $200 charge and the appraiser goes back out after the repairs are done. And I said, will the appraisal, is there a good chance with these repairs of the flooring, et cetera, with HVAC that's functioning, will the appraisal go up? And he said, probably not, but I wonder what you think.
Well, probably if it's a 203, the appraisal was done subject to the repairs being completed. So usually if it's 203K or whatever, we'll get a write-up saying they're going to put in new kitchen, HVAC, roof, windows. We'll do the appraisal as though that has already been completed.
Okay, so
I don't know if that's the case with what you have.
it's in
but-
line with what's been told though.
Yeah.
You're submitting the scope of work
Yeah, it has to-
with the contract to say, when we get done,
Yeah.
this is what the contractor's gonna charge us. And again, yes, they're gonna value it. And I tell a lot of people when they go into renovation loans, are you sure that if you do 100K in work, it's gonna appraise at that? Because again, that's where we fall in the difficulty in the work up
Right.
front, where the loans are. valued.
Yeah, and that's, in this case, it worked out okay. It's a modular home. It's in Dendron. The ones around might be 20,000 more, but it's brand new. So it kind of makes sense. It just wasn't what the client expected. And so I kind of wanted to set the scene and compare notes, like based on what I.
Did you give the same thing? You can still fight for comps if ever they're on it. You just gotta tell them how you came to that value with the repairs.
Okay, that was my third question. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
No, again. So if you have a unique property as a listing agent and you want to get a pre-listing appraisal done, just because you're struggling with comps, things like that, you might have to go out of the school district, out of whatever. How in line do you tend to, I mean, I don't even know if you see it on the back end, but 9 times out of 10, you're not going to get the same appraiser coming out once a buyer orders one. How close do you see those landing from a pre-listing standpoint to like in a
So glad
sales
you
situation?
mentioned that.
Go right ahead.
Yeah, we love doing pre-listing appraisals and I don't know about you, but I wasn't very good in school. So when I was growing up, if I could get the answers to a test prior to taking the test, I would take it, 11 times out of 10. And it's the same goes with a pre-listing appraisal. When you get a pre-listing appraisal done, we're doing all the same things that an appraiser is going to do when you sell the home for the bank. So, we tell all of our listing agents, by all means, take this appraisal, hand it to the appraiser that comes out. He may not use it, he may not even look at it, but I know when I get a pre-listing appraisal from a listing agent, I'm looking at it from top to bottom to see if, I covered everything, if I, all my data matches the data in the report, if I might have missed something, if it's a great report, I might just look at it and say, yep, that's awesome, and
Copy paste.
not copy and paste, will be reported. But no, yeah, we love doing appraisals. Since COVID, I would say our pre-listing appraisals have gone from maybe 5-10% of our business to 30 to 35% of our business. Just because the market has been so volatile. And there are more of those oddball, complex properties, complex assignments that agents are calling us and asking us to come out and do before they put the market on the home on the market.
We know what you
And
meant.
even if it's not an oddball assignment, a lot of agents are using it as marketing tools, to put in their listing, home has been appraised, is priced below appraisal, whatever have you, or it's part of their marketing package, so to speak. So by all
What-
means,
What do you guys charge for a pre-listing appraisal?
we'll definitely give you the Craig and Berry Friends and Family discounted rate.
Love that.
Typically, it's, I would say, a good baseline would be 350 to 450 for typical assignments. Now, if it's like a crazy oddball assignment, it could range from 500 to 1,000. So it depends on the property and how much time it's going to take us to do it.
Last question, because I'm in Carolina as well. What do you guys charge just to measure square footage? And so you do a pre-listing appraisal, but like Carolina, we have to measure the properties.
So yeah, our typical trip fee for a bank or lender is like right around 150, 200. So we typically charge that to go out and measure the house.
You said you're in Carolina. How far into Carolina do you go?
We are in northeastern North Carolina. I'm assuming you're talking about northeastern North Carolina?
Yeah, like what about Hertford, Edenton?
Yes, we
Yes.
cover Hertford, Edenton. Yeah, we kind of do the whole 17 to 168 route,
Loop,
so.
okay.
Outer Banks. Yeah, out 168, yeah.
So you do go all the way down the Outer Banks?
Yeah.
Okay, that's awesome. That's good to know. I know we have some people that do some work down there.
A couple questions. One agent said, I was told an appraiser can't look at a pre-listing appraisal.
Never heard that. I've never heard that one.
The answer is they've never heard that. They look very confused and bewildered. Second question is, how should an agent respond when asked if the home will pass a VA appraisal?
Oh, do you mean if the home will pass the inspection? Or do you mean will it appraise at
I
the
think,
sales price?
yeah, because I'm
gonna say the inspection.
Okay.
I would say the inspection. That's not what she said, but I would say the inspection. I'm going to say the inspection. If she wants to correct me, she can in the chat. But
Okay.
I would say the inspection.
Like, because there are a bunch of repairs that the appraisal request.
I think they're talking minimum condition.
Minimum property
Maybe what she meant
requirements.
to say, would it give clear VA appraisal, which is, I'm not going to say almost impossible, but sorry, I can't move.
You're all good.
You just found it out recently, but.
All right, so as a lender, we get this call often from the buyer's agent. They're like, we want to make an offer on this house, but the seller doesn't want a VA because there's issues with the house they don't want to repair. So while the VA gets a bad name for situations like this, the VA is very flexible on things that they will waive, even if it's subject to on a property. I've heard misnomer sometimes by other lenders saying you can't get a VA appraisal waiver. Again, knock on wood, I've never not gotten one, right? Unless it's like probably super terrible structural, you can appeal to the VA regionally to have that thing waived, whether I've had going brick, I've had deglazing of windows, I've had broken toilets, peeling paint, any walls not painted, floor coverings not being on the floor. And I really do think it's how you write the letter. But when you do that, your VA borrower is giving up the right for the VA to protect them for that, and the seller's not going to fix it. But if we can only get to closing that way, we can petition to the VA with a letter from your borrower stating that they're willing to. A lot of times the borrower wants to fix themselves, rotting deck boards, and the seller's not willing to fix it. And really the deck needs to come off. The same thing with the deglazing windows. These windows were from like 1950. They needed new windows in the house. So instead of deglazing them for $3,000, we wrote a letter to the VA and said, when we own this house, we are going to be replacing the windows, and they were able to get around it. But the VA is flexible like that, but that is a risk you take if there's something really wrong. But I'm not sure on an FHA it would pass, on a conventional it would pass, like a week. A week. So I really say, if it's something truly bad, I mean, we're not supposed to be giving loans for homes that need repairs, right? Unless you're doing a renovation loan. We're supposed to give safe, habitable homes. So, but we're trying to find ways, things that have not been maintained, ways around, as long as our borrowers are comfortable with, what they're walking
You guys have
into.
to sell this loan on the secondary market.
Yes,
So
we need this someone to
as
buy
a
it as
generational
well.
Investor on the secondary market, so.
But we've seen some things that we've gotten around, and I try to give that faith to the listing agent, because our borrower still wants this house, even though we visibly can see there's some things wrong. They want this house. And, my job is to guide them just like the agent. But if-
Diamond in
yeah,
the rough.
if this is what they want, here's what we have to do to get it. And again, there's still risk involved in every single transaction. So some people want a definite answer, and I'm like, we're gonna do our best. If that's what you want, I didn't come here to like work for free. What are we talking about?
So some of you may or may not know, I came from a naval nuclear compliance world. I was in RadCom before I got into mortgage lending. So what that means to you is our guidelines in naval nuclear compliance are kind of similar to the VA and FHA guidelines. I almost have like flashbacks when I'm reading VA and FHA guidelines to the nuclear guidelines, because a lot of it is gray area. Even in the naval nuclear world, it is still kind of gray area. It's up for interpretation. So much like Thomas, and even for the FHA that Brooks has to deal with, the guidelines are up for interpretation a lot of the times. And that's when Courtney and I earn our money, because we're salespeople at the end of the day, and we're pushers. We push until the underwriter says, no, I'm not doing it. And even when they say no, we say, well, who's your boss? No, and that's the God's honest truth. So, because we're really going to fight to close the loan if we think it's a good loan, and the buyer wants to buy the house. So I say that in that everything is up for interpretation. And how can we not spin it, but how can we spin it? How can we make it so that the underwriter understands and is happy with what they're being presented? Can we sell the loan? Is this loan sellable? Think about it if it was your money. That's what I always tell people. Think about it if it was your money and you were lending somebody $250,000. Would you want it to be safe and healthy and habitable for that person?
I'm going to add for the question about the appraisers, like making sure that you are well versed in what those guidelines are as an agent. Like, don't just take it for granted. Like, go to your broker, go to the classes. I say that because it was my agent that asked the question, so I'm allowed to say it. Make sure you're going to the classes, make sure you're going to the mentors, make sure you're going to the broker and knowing what those are, because after years, you can walk in a house and say, okay, this is what is needed.
We're gonna leave a bunch of business cards with all our information. If you ever have a question.
And totally reach out to them. They're happy to help. I mean, they would rather help than not help, for sure. It makes their job easier too. The other question here says, how much weight do you give a pre-listing appraisal? Have you ever come in lower than the pre-listing appraisal when it matches the list price? I'm sure you have. I'm sure that's but how much weight do you give a pre-listing appraisal is really the good.
You want to answer?
We still have to do our due diligence in our entire process. So we will look at the pre-listing appraisal. Typically, I'll do my appraisal and then go back and
So
look to
you
see.
use it for.
Yes, to see if I missed anything.
That's nice though.
Yes,
But you can still
absolutely.
use it. I mean, that's really the answer. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Square footage.
Any comps. We have seen pre-listing appraisals that were severely inflated, to lack of a better description.
Sure.
It doesn't hold much weight as far as, consideration towards what we're going to put on our report. Like I said, we still have to go through our process and our due diligence and collect all our data and do the whole dog and pony show. So
Rebecca was supposed to expand on hers. I don't see it yet though. We'd let you guys talk online, but doesn't filter through right now because of the microphone.
Also on that pre-listing, it depends on when it was formed too. Sometimes the pre-listing appraisal might have been done 6 months ago and they're better sales now. So it may or may not be in line with what was going on 6 months ago.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I have two questions, actually. I have a question about distance. So typically we're in a mile radius, correct?
Typically.
Okay, so I had one specifically that was a condo. It was the only detached condo within a year time frame that was being sold in this condo community. Only detached one.
I think you'd have to go outside to
Yeah.
find another
I mean,
detached,
what
yeah.
do
And you just
decide?
comment on, well, when you see there are no other sales that
Yeah.
are similar. And back to then, you,
The mile radius, is the lender requires.
Okay.
So they like
Yeah.
to see comparables within a mile. So if you go outside a mile, they want you to comment on why you went outside.
why you did it.
Now, like I said earlier, how many times have you been in the car with a buyer and you drove out a mile and then just turned left and stayed within that mile radius of a particular area? You don't. So it comes down to who's your typical buyer.
Yeah, and was that buyer looking at that unit because it's detached, or was it because they wanted to be in that project? Probably because it's detached.
Okay, okay,
Um,
fair. I was just curious. I was like, where do we get this guideline? Where does it come from? Like, why?
Yeah, that's a
And
lender guideline.
my
of
second
mile
question
distance.
is that out in other markets further to the west, I've seen quite frequently lately that appraisals are coming in good. But the appraisal is noting a downward trend in the market and the underwriting desks are coming back and not lending on the full amount. They're not giving 100% of the loan.
I haven't experienced
No,
that
must
here,
be
so I
based
don't.
on some algorithm that we're.
Yeah, I mean, it's coming back on just, I mean, it's coming back
Don't
on
know the
Fannie
answer to
Fannies and
that one.
Freddie's and everything west it moves our way. So I didn't know if you guys had
No, I haven't
heard
been-
anything in the wind.
I haven't been in too many markets recently that
Okay.
are showing any sort of downward trends or declining.
All right, fair enough.
Values of prices, yeah.
Back to the pre-listing appraisal, they want, they want to know, even when it's from a firm that's as reputable as yours, do you still just use it for reference in guidelines and not use it for?
Are we on the record still?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Still the same,
We
okay.
do- Like, she said, we don't copy and paste anything. We don't, verbatim anything. We still have to do our due diligence and go through the entire.
We're gonna do our own
Yeah.
report.
And isn't it the appraiser's opinion of value?
Yeah.
Yes.
At the end of the day, we're signing our name on
The
that.
word is added in, it's
appraisal
like
report.
estimate.
Yeah.
Opinion, yeah. And
Our
Brooks' opinion
certification.
might be different than mine.
Yeah, just, mine's a quick one. So, just real quick, this was a few years ago. I had a appraiser actually demand I give them the PICRA. Is that a rule? If you guys ask for it, do I have to give it to you?
Would probably be a question for the lender. I mean,
I would say no.
yeah, I don't think there's. We're
And-
supposed to have a full copy of the contract, so.
Yeah, and
so
if,
I'm
and is that
thinking-
technically part of the
I
contract,
think
then,
that was
but
their
we never
argument,
get them.
was that they said,
It's not part of the, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not the contract guy, but I do come to her meetings every week. It's not the purchase agreement. It's not the 16-page purchase agreement. That's all y'all
Still part of
technically.
it.
It's still,
it's still
it's,
part of the contract
it's-
and,
part of
yeah.
it. I say as a broker, so we don't get any other company or issue. I say no and then have your broker handle it. And I am your broker and I would love to talk to them.
That's
just
it.
saying,
That's
I-
what's-
Give
Less
them my
is-
number and tell them Godspeed when they go.
Less is always more in our world, so.
A couple insurance companies a month after closing come to us and either they were gonna send out an inspector to look at the house or they wanted a copy of the, yeah.
Hmm.
And one of my agents was like, what? And I said, look, they're gonna drop their insurance if either someone comes out or they just wanna see if this was done and this was repaired. And I wonder sometimes if because I feel like I've had an appraiser ask that before, and I think they're probably looking at something to call it out subject to, but aren't going to if it was part of the. Yeah.
And
And
that
again,
might be a
that's up to you to
case where
submit it.
the
I know I've
selling
seen it,
agent
but
is contacting the appraiser saying, hey, this has some deficiencies. They want to make sure that it gets repaired. It gives them negotiating.
Right, no, at the end of the
Yeah.
day, it's all gonna be what the underwriter wants to see on that report.
Nikki did one, and there's a lady.
I mean, Cregan, you remember that deal we did in Norfolk with like the detached studio that had a bathroom and like a kitchenette with
Oh, the
what
ADU.
could have been a
Yes.
freestanding oven, which might not have been
Yes.
To code.
required by zoning.
Yeah, it was basically, it was an ADU, but it wasn't like an actual ADU. It wasn't like an approved
We spent
ADU.
about 3/4 of a day talking about, well, what does the underwriter want for this?
Yeah. Yeah.
The underwriter went for
I think
that.
we ended up not giving it value, right? We basically just took it off in a sense, or however that works.
How do you guys consider like pool houses, the square footage? Do you guys go like give value for as per square footage for that neighborhood?
Yeah, we give credit for a pool house.
It won't be considered
And-
in the gross living area of the main dwelling. So, we'll measure the house and it'll be how big the house is, how many bedroom, bathrooms, total rooms. And then, on a separate line item of the sales comparison approach, we'll put detached guest suite or pool house or studio and how big that is, and then give that consideration based on the market that you're in, what we think it would contribute as far as the value is concerned.
Like a detached garage that has a room over, that won't be included in the gross living area, even though it's finished, but because it's not connected to the house, you can't get to it without going outside, then we're not allowed to include that, but you do get credit for it.
Okay.
If you have to leave the main dwelling to access any sort of outside miscellaneous living area, then we cannot include it in the gross living area of the main dwelling.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So my question is, with
Yeah.
builders now building a lot out in the rural areas, farming areas, how do y'all go about pricing or appraising those? Is it going to be a cost approach? And some of them are on farms. That's working farms.
Properties.
Yeah.
But
You-
they're like a mile, more than a mile.
Hardest thing is we're gonna have a unique.
So
Yeah.
when you're,
Well, you're talking about a rural area.
Mhm.
So yeah, that mile distance really
Goes
has
Doesn't
no
even-
impact, yeah.
Okay.
we just did one in Pungo yesterday and I used comps from Blackwater, which was 9 miles away. But it's part of the neighborhood, really.
Okay.
Uh,
All right, we got one back here.
I'm just asking questions because, all right, so, let's say you have you take your house, you have like a two-car garage, attached two-car garage, and you turn that into a mother-in-law suite. Does that add value or stay the same, take away value?
I think it would matter if you were
Okay.
able to fully permit
Yeah,
it or
it-
not, because if it's not,
Well, we're talking
then it
about doing
doesn't count.
We're talking.
So it's heated and cooled and finished to the same levels as the rest of the dwelling. Yeah. All right, you're gaining square footage, so that's gonna add, but you're also losing a two-car garage. So in a lot of cases, that's kind of a wash. Because in that neighborhood, probably that fifth bedroom or fourth bedroom and no garage isn't expected or demanded by the market because everybody's got the two-car garage. Not to say that it's not worth anything, but I'm not sure it's gonna make the property worth more. I mean, do you have a different take on
Nope,
that? or-
that's exactly what I was gonna say.
That's a great point. I had a question too. I know this is something that comes up a lot, in our market, the hand railing question. The steps question. I know this is a good one, that it gets brought up more times than not, probably more than anything that we've even talked about today. So bless you. It's a double-sided question. First, I'm gonna go to the VA. I want the VA answer to the handrail, and then I want the conventional FHA answer for the handrail. And I don't need to really go too deep into what I'm talking about, right? We all know what I'm talking about. All right, cool. Go ahead. There you go.
Well, I think the answer for the VA and the FHA are the
It's
same.
gonna be similar.
Conventional, it's not required unless really a safety issue, super steep steps or something, and there's no handrail but
That's the building code of the local market.
that's what we're supposed to follow as far as the handrail. Yep, and I think that,
Though it was on a VA appraisal before, they didn't require the steps in the backyard, and then we had a VA loan and we did, and they're like, what do you mean? This was here before, and I'm like, unfortunately, your building code just said if it's over this height.
if they
it's
have,
not
yeah,
happening.
a
Because
height
one of
or
those
number of
big,
risers, I think is what they
like that.
refer to them.
Yeah, so from your experience, let's just say we were in Norfolk, Virginia Beach, because that's where we're at right now. From your experience, what would you call out for needing a handrail?
I think 36 inches is typical of most of the 7 cities.
Okay,
But we'll
Yeah.
go straight to the city website and see what
Okay.
is building code.
so 36 inches is the
And then
relative. I'm just trying to get a rule of thumb for our listing agents that are trying to fight the
Yeah,
battle
and-
too.
And on the steps, I think in Portsmouth, Norfolk, it might be 3 or more risers Virginia
Okay.
Beach, it might be 4.
Yeah.
But we'll check.
The way,
And that is something that VA will waive. I've had them waive it
Yes,
on,
100%.
if the homeowner says, I don't want to do it, and they sign off on it, then
the way it was
They'll waive.
presented years ago when we did a VA appraisal class is they said, imagine you're appraising a home in Michigan versus appraising a home in Miami. In Miami, it doesn't matter as much because they don't get any snow. But in Michigan, they get tons of snow. So that's why, that was the rule of thumb kind of that they gave us, like, you know, on how many steps need a hand railing, kind of think about the safety. We can always go back to safety. It's the same thing when I worked on boats. It's all about safety, and the same thing for the home when we're trying to securitize these loans on these homes. It's all about the health and safety. Definitely.
Yep.
Thank you. That's great.
Yep.
Any more questions? Any online? Any questions online?
I think Chrissy's trying to figure out what Rebecca's expansion question is,
I-
but we can continue on.
I got you.
Hold on, wait,
I got
people online really want to hear the question.
It's actually interesting that you guys just touched into code because I was gonna ask, how closely do you guys pay attention to code? For example, with like an ADU and the stove you had mentioned, like fire door between garage and interior, things like that. How much of that are you like calling out?
So that's our first question. If there is an ADU, that's our first question is it properly permitted? Did you permit it? And, you know, if it was done prior to the current seller, or the current homeowner moving in, you know, that's what they typically say. Well, we don't know. It was done before we moved in. Then we'll have to make a call downtown to the city, you know, planning or zoning. Is this permitted? Because a lot of times it won't be shown on the city site online. But it is shown, you know, sometimes on the site as well. So we do take that into consideration. If it's properly permitted, then, you know, it's business as usual typically, so.
Intended use and I mean, you're not stupid. You can tell if there's like a stub in for the stove that's not supposed to
Right.
have a stove in it.
Yeah.
Is that something you're gonna flag like?
Yes
connection
and
needs to be
no. I
taken
mean,
out? So, like, you don't wanna
if
camper.
it's not a safety issue, or if it looks just like a freestanding stove with one of those, you know, the 3-prong plug-in that most stoves have, you know.
Considered personal.
Yeah, we can maybe make a comment that it's personal property, and that it, you know, wasn't considered to be, part of the kitchenette or the ADU.
And that would go back to the underwriter, you know, what they're gonna require.
Yeah.
Because they take pictures. I'm sure you all have looked at the appraisal and
I was getting ready to
inspection
say,
reports.
it's
They
gonna,
take-
what's gonna show up in the picture?
What I do when we first get it, and I'll go in and I'll look at it before it even goes to the collateral underwriter. And that's the first thing I look for, is holes in walls, electrical panel issues, anything that's not just a normal, like, this is the living room, this is the bathroom. And I've even made it a habit of going in and looking at the backyard to see if there's like something, you know, that will get called out potentially. We had a VA appraisal, and the daggone, the poor listing agent, I still remember his full name and who he works for and how many years he's been in business. Yeah, I digress. They did a listing and he literally left the caution tape up where the back steps to go onto the back deck. Okay, and in that same exact picture from the appraiser, so the yellow thing, the appraiser didn't call it out, and guess who did? Our underwriter, because obviously it's freaking yellow caution tape. And they had a backhoe, a skid steer in the backyard, and it was not in West Neck or wherever, Ivor or wherever. It was in a normal neighborhood in Chesapeake. And so they called that out, like, is there active construction going on? I see yellow caution tape. I see a skid steer. So I encourage you, your buyers and listing side, because we're all a team here. If you go and do an inspection on a home and they have a damn skid steer in the backyard, ask the listing agent to please remove the skid steer, unless you want the appraiser to take a picture of it.
And I don't know how this affects you guys with ADUs yet as realtors. We just closed one in Chesapeake that had an ADU and we fought for value. And the hardest part was finding comps because I guess you guys don't, when the appraiser's looking for comps, the system you're using doesn't distinguish like buildings with an ADU, even though more of them are happening, I guess maybe because some of them are all zoned. And we did end up, our company did allow, I guess, for them to go way outside to actually find a comparable comp. I know Norfolk's pushing for ADUs. I think this will be a big thing coming up on appraisals, getting value, all the things, but How hard is it for you to find?
Are you
comps
talking like
that?
the system we use is in the MLS, like rain?
Yeah, like it's not marked, like
Yeah.
you can march attached, detached, fourplex, but ADU wasn't an option.
Yeah, there's a couple like criteria
downs.
searches that you can put in, like ADU or in-law suite or guest suite
But
or.
they're marking like in-law, which is not an ADU.
Correct.
Right, and
correct. Yeah,
that's,
it's a
it's,
lot of
uh,
gray area in that
so
ADU
we should start paying
space.
attention to
accessory
this
unit.
for, because I think Norfolk just said they're gonna.
It depends
lighten
what
the
market you're in.
guidelines on getting cards.
Yeah, it
We need
depends.
appraisals to
Like
come in
if
and
you're in
value
East
with them.
Beach, those ADUs are crazy expensive and they rent them out for, as much as, one of the higher market rental markets in Norfolk. And they're essentially carriage houses or studios. So,
Okay, so this is some on me. So I had a home built. The builders put it in wrong with the city, so my house is listed as a single family home. But I have an in-law attached that was built on at the time the house was built. How do y'all go about considering that as a in-law when no other houses have it?
can you access the
Because-
in-law suite from the main house?
Yes, but it has its own kitchen. It's a two-bedroom,
Okay.
one whole kitchen, living room, diner, has its
Okay.
own separate interest.
Right.
But we share, when I had it built, built it where we could share it through the laundry room,
Mhm.
so we could share laundry room.
Okay.
I can lock off that side, everything.
So it's going to be part of the main dwelling. It's not going to be considered an in-law suite or an accessory unit of any sort. We will give extra consideration for those bathrooms and the kitchenette or whatever have you. And we'll note that it has an in-law suite, but it's attached and accessible through the main dwelling of the home.
Yeah. I agree with that.
Great, great
And
question.
you were smart to have it so you could access it from the main house. Because otherwise that would have been, would have been considered.
Rebecca did expand on her question. She said she was told not to send a pre-listing appraisal to an appraiser. It was a VA appraiser, and that no appraiser can look at a different appraiser's work.
I hadn't heard that one.
Mike was taken from me.
We cannot be an intended user of the report. We cannot use that report for anything. And furthermore, the intended user is typically the client, which I touched on earlier, for that said assignment. So more times than not, whoever the client is on the report, we send the report to, they are the intended user. They're the only party that can use that report. Now, looking at the report, if you hand me a report, I can look at it all day
Like
long.
you said earlier, it's looking like a comp. You're using it just like.
Yeah, be like handing us listings.
Yeah.
These are the listings I looked at when it's just data. It doesn't, we might agree with it or disagree with it. It doesn't.
Yeah, I think questions online are good. That was the last one for the online portion.
So we have-
Anybody else in here?
So
We
go-
have
Back up front.
Let's go. Let's see how it comes.
So when y'all doing appraisals on homes that have septic and well, like I had one in Carolina, the septic was shot. It was water up, but y'all can't dig. How do y'all go about, do y'all look at inspection on that?
Yeah, we always, unless they're, unless you're doing the inspection and it's stinking Lincoln back there, something's going on. But yeah, we're not inspecting the well and septic, but we'll put a
comment.
an historian assumption that the well and septic systems are working appropriately. If this is not the case, this could have an impact on the appraisal.
And we'll require or recommend that the lender get a
Be inspected.
or an inspection
Yeah.
provided.
What if they already had that? Do y'all ask for the reports on that?
You're saying you had it tested and it failed miserably, it came back really bad?
Yeah, I'd like to know that information. Then I do the appraisal subject to being remedied.
Segue to foundation issues. Because that's what we do, we repair all of that stuff and sometimes it can get pretty darn costly. And to my knowledge, y'all don't go into a crawl space to inspect those things.
FHA and VA, we're required to.
Just
take a
All right.
picture.
head and
Take
shoulder inspection, but yeah, we're not crawling in there. And we are no way structural experts. We're there to look for readily observable deficiencies.
And that's it when you're evaluating.
But that's not to say if, one of the agents comes up and hands us this report, look, they need all this work under the house. Well, now we're aware of it. Now we have to do it subject to.
So we've covered a lot of stuff like that we don't know, but like, or that we had questions too, but what would you guys say is like the biggest thing you wish agents knew or did? Like, what do agents miss the most from your guys' standpoint that you think we should be doing?
I would like what Jimmy Ray was saying with the updates. If you have a listing, if you can put everything that was done in the year, that's tremendous help. Also, if it's an FHA or VA and there's peeling paint everywhere, the house was built, prior to 78, and there's obviously deficiencies, just be aware that that's going to have to be remedied.
And set reasonable expectations for your listing or the listing side.
Yeah, the biggest misnomer or issue that we might have with agents oftentimes is that they will disregard sales within the immediate market area, immediate neighborhood, and just go outside to get comps that will make their deal work. Does that make sense? So there'll be 3 sales 4 streets away in the subject's immediate neighborhood
It just closed.
that just closed within the last 90 days that establish or support X market value, but they'll go to the adjacent neighborhood and pick 2 or 3 sales that establish or support Y market value. That's a huge thing for us.
That's great. Awesome. Any more questions? I got one here.
This is a really dumb one.
No dumb questions.
No, it's really dumb. Refresh on when you order an appraisal. For example, subject is under contract and you order it 1-2 houses down that you want to be counted as a comp. It's going to close in 2 days.
Pending sale.
It's pending going
Okay.
to close.
Good question.
Is it from the date you order the appraisal or the date the appraisal is performed that the property has to be sold?
The effective date of the appraisal, which is the date we do the inspection.
Okay, so if we order it,
It's been an issue. One just sold, I'm like, but the.
The effective
if we
date of
order
the
it on
appraisal.
Tuesday, takes place on Friday, ops closes Thursday, that's good, you can count it. You order the appraisal on Tuesday. The appraisal actually takes place on Friday. The comp that you wanted closes on Thursday. So in
Yeah,
between the time
close
that you
the day
order, it's
before
recorded.
the effective date. Absolutely.
Perfect.
Question.
Everyone understand that, because again, it's been an issue, like this one sold, I can't believe you won't go back and add it, And I'm like, there's a.
We have gone back out to properties.
I've
sometimes
gone
just
and to
include the pending
re-inspect.
sale.
Yeah, if you,
Talking, you, what?
if this is the case and there's a pending sale and you're in a neighborhood where there are not a lot of great sales, maybe a waterfront property, a very unique property, and there's one very similar that would make a great comp that's closing maybe a week after I did the original inspection, I might wait, as long as they're not under time frame, go back and re-inspect the house so I can put a new effective date so I can include that comp. So you're talking a week later, but I would go back out and re-inspect the house, walk through to make sure, there's no damage to the house and make that the effective date. That's extremely rare.
Allow that.
It's correct, yeah.
Is there
I think
a
what-
charge
that's-
when you go back out, will you charge extra?
Yes,
Just a trip.
I don't because it's so rare. And
but
Yeah.
again, I just want to put it
That
out
just
there,
depends on the
lenders
appraiser.
do not
Correct.
want you to manipulate value.
That
You try to
depends on the
pull
appraiser.
these things, unless maybe it was subject to or something, we can't just. send we
Yeah.
caught one
Right.
battle.
But that makes it easier on the appraiser because all right, here's the sale that just closed that's very similar to the subject. This is the best comp. Now, if I didn't do that, I would put it on as number 4 as a pending sale. If I had 3 other great sales and just say this is further support. But that's a rare situation.
I've done appraisals before where literally 0 similar comparables or nothing that really shows what the subject is worth and put most weight on the pending sale and mark in the report when it's closing. You know, it all, like Courtney said, it all depends on the lender and the underwriters and who's gonna look at the report and what they're gonna say, but,
So if we tell you,
at the end of the day, if that's the best data that you have, then that's the best data that you have.
So if we're the listing agent, you call us, contact us to set up the appraisal appointment and.
You know that.
We're like, hey,
Mhm.
this comp is closing on Thursday, could you come out Friday instead? Because we
Absolutely.
want it to be.
Sure.
Yeah.
You're not like offended by that.
No, that's the best way to go about doing it. 'cause
Yeah.
At the end of the day,
That makes it easier.
At the end of the day, you're the one, as a listing agent, you're in control of when they have access to the property, right? So you know, even if you don't tell them that, you say, look, best time we can get you in there is Friday, you know?
Yeah.
You forget your question? Yeah, I forgot my question. Sorry about that interruption. For those of you that stayed on, we lost about 5 people. For those of you that stayed on, you got some great info in that last 10 minutes though. So it proves when you're on a Zoom, don't leave. Put it on your phone and keep listening because that last bit where he was like, we will go out, that was good info.
Yes. So to be clear, order that appraisal on a Tuesday. Order the appraisal on a Tuesday. And what was the other part? Order on a Tuesday.
Have the comp close on Thursday, have the inspection on Friday.
There it is.
But if
Ingrained
there
in
is
your
room
brain.
to, there is a little bit of room depending on the lender. So.
So I think that's pretty much it.
If you want to get it close, like, let's go ahead and schedule, you know what I mean? Like, make sure that you're doing what's the best interest of your client, which would be to try to get that out a little bit more so that one does close so you can put that comp in there. Do you like to have agents, listing agents at the property when you're doing the appraisal?
We tell all the agents to meet us there, yeah, I mean,
I have never met an appraiser who says no to this, guys, just so you know. We have not.
like Tom said, we wanna see what you're thinking, how you
Yeah.
price that property out, so if there are any issues that we know what you're thinking.
Yeah, so that's awesome. That's great. We had great information. I want to give a huge thank you to Tom and Brooks from Sending in Green, for coming out today. I know that I got a lot of great information. I'm sure we had a lot of aha moments, and anybody that I've talked to in the last couple of days, I said, I promise if you come, you'll have a couple aha moments. I hope you had 2 or 3 at least. But thank you again to you. Thank you again to Coastal Town Realty and Thomasina, for hosting us here. And then we got a pleasant surprise. We got dessert for you, courtesy of Talent Termite. Melissa showed up. She got some donuts for you. No. That's plenty, but I'm gonna die. But yes, for those of you online, thank you so much for coming. Feel free to keep in touch. We'll try and keep in touch. I do encourage you all to follow me on social media, Captain Mortgage, Craig and Barry on Instagram, Craig and Barry on Facebook. And I think Melissa and I are gonna try and work something out and get a Talent Termite to come out and do a similar Q&A with some of her pros. So location and time TBDs, but stay in touch and thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having. Yes. I want to do a quick video. Do a quick video.
We don't need the mic, right?
Uh,